What's up, everyone?
Hey guys.
Today we've got an exciting topic, something that all travel therapists are curious about, that we find people that contact us considering travel. The number one consideration for them is the pay. So we want to talk a little bit about travel pay today, how that compares to permanent pay, and what you can expect as a traveling therapist. So I'm going to go ahead and share this video in a few different groups to try to get some more people in here asking questions. If you guys have questions as we go along, feel free to ask them. Whitney's going to introduce us, and I'll be right back.
Alright guys, so we're going to get started here. Just as a recap, we're going to talk about travel therapy pay today. For y'all that may not know us, my name's Whitney and this is Jared, and we are the faces behind the Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist blog. We've had our blog for a couple years now. We have been traveling physical therapists for about 3.5 years.
3.5 years.
And just recently, in the past few months, we actually started a new website. It's called Travel Therapy Mentor, and we run that site with a fellow travel physical therapist, Travis Kemper. So we've been doing a lot more kind of informational stuff here lately. So some of you guys may have tuned in for some of our other videos that we've done. We've been doing one a week on different therapy, travel therapy topics. So this week's topic is really important, understanding travel therapy pay. So we aren't just on here to talk about how great it is and how much money you can make. We also want to talk about some of the more realistic aspects of understanding exactly how the travel pay is broken down and what you can expect to bring home, and also taking into account some expenses. Because we definitely hear a lot of people get super excited about the travel therapy pay and how high it can be. It can definitely be really lucrative, and you definitely make more than at most permanent therapist jobs. But there are a lot of naysayers out there that will say, well, I make more at my permanent job, or, you know, after considering expenses and that sort of thing, it wouldn't make sense for me to travel. So we want to help you guys to be the most informed travelers and therapists that you can be. So we wanted to help you guys today to understand how the therapy pay, the travel pay is broken down, and what to take into account when it comes to expenses. So like we said, Jared is just sharing this video in a couple groups, so that way a few more people can join on with us. I see a few of you have already tuned in. If you would, please just comment below and let us know who you are. If you are tuning in, just say hey, tell us who you are. Are you a student? Are you a current therapist? What's your discipline? And you know what you're thinking about as far as travel goes. What brought you here today to watch with us? So go ahead and comment below. I see that Lauren Vincent is on. Hi Lauren. I know you're trying to learn a little bit more about travel therapy, and you've sent us a couple messages, so it's good to see you joining in this week. And then we've got a few other people on, so if you're hopping on, just go ahead and say hey below. Also, if you guys are watching this on the replay, I know that a lot of people will watch it later at a more convenient time for them. Just shoot us a comment below, or give us a like, give us a thumbs up. That way more people can see this video and more people can learn. There's a lot of misconceptions about travel therapy, so we want this video to get out there so more people can learn and understand the way the pay works and how everything's broken down. So we got a couple people here. Let's see, Julie says, hey, Sean and Julie here, current travel PTs. PT Journeys. Hey guys, we see you on Instagram all the time. Good to see you guys. So you guys just started, right? Just a few months ago? How long have y'all been traveling? Leave us a comment below. So as Jared's getting this shared up in a couple groups, we'll jump right into the topic in just a minute to talk about the difference between the travel therapy pay and the permanent therapist pay, which is kind of the big thing that everybody wants to know when they're talking about how do you compare really apples to oranges. You know, how do you compare the way that a traveler gets paid versus a regular salaried or hourly position. So Jared, you just got it pulled up everywhere.
Yep.
We're dealing with some slow internet connections, so it's taking us a little longer.
Yeah, hopefully there's no lag because the internet's not great.
Yeah. Oh, side note, so we've actually been searching for our next travel therapy jobs for a little bit. Anybody that follows our story, we have been back from our trip out of the country. We just got back in December from a 5-month trip around the world, and we've actually been searching for our next travel therapy contracts ever since about the beginning of January. And we were having a little bit more difficulty finding contracts this time. We were being just a little bit more picky, but we finally nailed something down, and we're actually moving tomorrow. So I'm kind of jittery and a mess today because we've been moving, kind of packing up all of our stuff and everything, getting ready to move tomorrow. So that's exciting news. We finally found jobs. Okay, so Julie's commenting. Let's see. Julie said, Sean has been traveling for 2 years, and she just hopped on board 3 months ago. Woohoo! That's exciting. So it's good to see you guys hopping on, joining in with us tonight. And I see Amryn just joined the party. Amryn is starting her first travel therapy contract tomorrow, and we've been talking quite a bit. She had some questions for me back in the beginning when she was working on her pay package and understanding, you know, what she should be making as a new grad. So that's definitely a topic of conversation we can talk about, is new grad pay. Okay,
All right.
So we're up and running in a couple groups here. I see we've got 20-ish, 26 people on. If you guys are watching, go ahead and comment below and tell us who you are and why you're here. We'd appreciate knowing what brings you here tonight.
Yep. So let's jump into some of the differences between travel pay and permanent pay. Whitney and I were just talking about this not long ago. We've been traveling all this time, and usually travel pay is talked about in terms of net take-home pay per week, whereas permanent pay is usually talked either about in salary or talked about in hourly pay. And that creates some difficulties comparing things. And the other day I was thinking, like, how could we make this easier? And what I determined is there is no way to make it easier. And that's probably the why it is the way it is, and why people talk about it in terms of net weekly pay versus a gross number or anything like that. So the difference is that some of the pay as a traveler, as long as you have a tax home, is untaxed stipends, which means that you can't compare that to a gross salary number, because since it's untaxed, if you just said, say you have $1,000 a week in stipends, and then you have $800 a week in taxable pay. If you just had a gross pay of $1,800, that wouldn't compare to a gross pay of $1,800 at a permanent job, because $1,000 of that is untaxed, which makes this confusing.
Definitely. And if you're not a numbers person like me, this all just sounds like gibberish. So we do have a couple articles where we've actually broken this down in text form. So once we get done with the video, we'll share those articles for you guys that are more visual learners and want to see some examples. But just to kind of recap, so if you guys chat with your friends or colleagues or people that you know that are working in the profession, say physical therapy like us, or occupational therapy, speech therapy, PTA, OTA, they'll usually say, oh, I make $75,000 a year. And
or $35 an hour.
Yeah, and that's their salary number. And they're always talking about it in gross pay. Everyone in the world talks about their pay in gross pay. You know, maybe your mom is a secretary and she makes $40,000 a year. She talks about her money in gross pay. Maybe your friend is a lawyer and he makes $125,000 a year. That's gross pay always.
Yeah, travel therapy is not the same.
The weird thing is,
it's always
yeah,
net pay.
so you talk to a travel therapist and we say, oh, we make $1,600 a week. That's always net pay. So it's weird. The reason why they do this, if you were to, like Jared said, if you were to try to talk about travel therapy pay in gross pay, it wouldn't be accurate because only half of it is taxed.
It misrepresents the number. So I didn't realize that there was such a misconception about that. I posted this stupid meme in the Doctor of Physical Therapy group about making $1,600 per week as a traveler. And there's all these permanent therapists that are saying, I make more than that at my permanent job. Why would I travel? But the difference is they're talking about gross pay, whereas in the travel world, we're talking about net pay.
Yeah.
So $1,600 in gross pay is nowhere near $1,600 net pay. You know, it might be $1,200 or $1,250 or something like that. It's a lot less.
Right.
But that makes a lot of confusion, and it's really hard to talk about the differences. And so because of that, usually the way I do it, which is also not exactly accurate, is you can take that net pay and try to translate it into what a gross pay would be. So what gross pay would you need to come out with that net weekly pay? And so for instance, an example I use a lot in articles is, let's say that you make $1,500 a week after taxes and you worked 50 weeks a year. That would equal a gross equivalent pay of about $120,000, somewhere between $115,000 and $120,000, depends on what state you're in and things like that. But so that's a good way to compare that number to a permanent job. But the problem with making that comparison, so say, okay, as a traveler, you might make $120,000 a year, somewhere between $120,000 or $150,000 a year is a good estimate. But you also have to factor in that you have to pay housing in 2 different places. So it's not exactly a fair comparison there either. So it's really difficult to compare to permanent pay.
Right. So just to talk a little bit more about the details, When you're presented with a job as a travel therapist, they'll present you with what we call a pay package, and most of them are going to be pretty similar. So it just helps for you to kind of know the lingo and be able to talk the talk. When you're talking to recruiters and you're talking to them about jobs, we usually tell people, for example, for physical therapy, it's pretty similar for OT and for speech. It's a little lower for PTA and OTA, but generally a good range that you're looking for is anywhere from about $1,500 a week to about $1,800 a week, just depending on the setting and the location. Like I said, this $1,500 to $1,800 a week, that's net pay or after-tax pay, and that's how they'll talk to you about it. So if you ever see a job advertised, just make sure, every now and then recruiters will try to trick you and they'll put like $2,200 gross pay. That's not the same thing. You want to know about net pay, and you want to be looking anywhere from that about $1,500 to $1,800 range.
Yep.
Okay, here's how they're going to present it to you. So they'll say, usually that net pay number, they'll say, okay, this is going to be your hourly rate, and that's about half your pay. So your hourly rate might be $20 or $21 an hour, and that's going to be taxed, and that's going to vary. So they're actually estimating your take-home pay. It varies depending on how you file your taxes. So for the most part, they're going to quote you a number based on single and zero, which is going to be a lot of us who just gotten out of school or have no dependents or that sort of thing. You're going to file usually single and zero, and they'll tax that $20 or $21 or $22 an hour based on that. But if you have a family or dependents or that sort of thing, your taxes are going to be different. Okay, and then after that taxable hourly rate, the next thing they're going to give you is they're going to say this is going to be your stipend, and this isn't going to be taxed. So this will just be a flat rate that you'll receive every week. Some companies will do it just in a lump sum. They'll say you'll receive $1,050 a week, period.
And that's for housing, meals, and incidentals. All three of those things would be grouped in. Or sometimes they'll break it down to like 700 that is for housing, 300 is for meals, and 100 is for incidentals, or however they want to break it down.
Yep. And then sometimes they'll even do it in an hourly number, which is super confusing. I personally just prefer the ones where they'll show it to me and they'll just email you the breakdown, and it'll say $20 times 40 hours taxed. And then they'll say plus $1,050. And so I would, for me, if I knew it was going to be, what did we say? We would look in somewhere like 15% taxes. So if it was going to be...
Well, it's probably just use 20 or 25%.
Okay, so $20 an hour times 40 hours. So you'd be looking at $800. This is going to be taxed at, let's say, 20%. So then you want to multiply it by 0.8 to get your net pay, $640. I know it's backwards. $640. So that's going to be your hourly pay after taxes, $640. And then they're going to say, and you're going to make $1,000 a week stipend, flat rate, no taxes. So $1,000, and that's how you get a number like $1,640 a week net. And that means net, like after taxes, like in your bank account, for real.
Yeah.
So that's what it means when we say between $1,500 to $1,800 a week. So if your buddies are saying, well, if you take my salary, $70,000, and divide it by 52 weeks, then I make, that much a week. Well, yeah, that's...
What is that, 13?
$1,350. Yeah.
So yeah, they might say like, okay, well, I make $1,350 a week. You only make $1,600. It's not worth traveling. But the difference is that's a gross pay number versus a net pay number after
So then
taxes.
would you need to multiply this by 0.8?
You'd probably multiply by like 0.75 because the tax rate would be higher.
Yeah. So if you multiply it, just for example, by
It's around
0.8, then they're
$1,000.
really only making $1,000 a week. So it really is a big difference. Because we know, and I hope most of you know, that there's a huge range in the permanent world, especially like for PT. I mean, the rare person in a SNF that's making $90,000 or $100,000, but most of your friends in outpatient and acute and that sort of thing are making between 60 and 80,000. Yeah, we've known people on the lower end of that, in lower cost of living areas. What do we have friends that were taking like
58, I think.
Yeah.
And even lower than that. Some people I know like 54.
Right.
So.
And of course you have people on the higher end of that. You have people that do cash based, or they work a really lucrative job, or they
Home
also
health.
have a home health job, and they make it on the higher end of that. So it's just really difficult to compare side by side with a permanent job. But the bottom line is you do make quite a bit as a traveler.
Yeah, and so on average, just to give you an example, over 3.5 years, We've only been on the East Coast, and the East Coast is usually lower paying than the West Coast. So just keep that in mind. If you were working in California, you'd probably make more than we've made, but also cost of living might be higher, something to consider. But we've worked on the East Coast mainly, and our average has been somewhere around $1,670 over that whole 3-year period after taxes, which is somewhere around, if you convert that to an equivalent of a salary, would be somewhere around probably about $130,000 or $135,000 a year. So that's mainly what we've made over the last 3.5 years is around that equivalent.
Right. So something we also want to talk about just briefly is if you qualify for the tax-free stipends. Okay, so a lot of times they'll quote you these numbers and they're saying, okay, your stipend is going to be untaxed. There's a lot of stipulations with the IRS for you to qualify for tax-free stipends. There's a great website called traveltax.com, which I would encourage you guys to read up on if you're planning on going into travel therapy. We've also written some articles about tax homes. So basically there's some rules. You need to maintain a tax home in order to be in, so you need to have expenses at your tax home, while also having expenses at your travel location in order for you to qualify to receive these stipends. Now you really want to mind your P's and Q's in case you ever get audited. The travel company, mostly they might just have you sign some kind of piece of paper that says, yeah, I maintain a tax home, and they'll give you the tax-free stipends, but you are the one who needs to be responsible for yourself and maintaining your paperwork.
Yeah, if you get audited, it doesn't matter what the company told you, what your recruiter said, what paper you signed. You have to have evidence that you did what was right by the law. So you need to have duplicate expenses. You need to be going back to your tax home often, which most professionals in this area will say 30 days out of the year you need to be back at your tax home. So that's something that you have to make sure you're doing.
So read up on the rules on traveltax.com. We are not tax experts. We are just giving you some information that we've learned based on our experiences. But I really encourage you guys to read up on traveltax.com. There's a few different stipulations. It's not just as simple as maintaining a permanent address. You do need to maintain what's called duplicating expenses. You do need to go back there often. You do need to conduct some sort of business there, whether that means having your car registered there, paying taxes there, that sort of thing.
Voter registration, bank account.
So when talking about your bottom line as a travel therapist, you need to take into account what are your expenses at your tax home and what are your expenses going to be like where you're going to live. So if you're going to plan to take, say you have your own house and you have to pay a whole mortgage that's $1,200 a month plus all of your utilities and things at your home in New Jersey, and then you also really want to take places in super desirable areas like San Francisco and Los Angeles
With higher cost of living.
So then you're paying $1,200 a month back home while also paying $2,000 or $2,500 a month to have an apartment at this really cool location in LA. Then you're having over $3,000 a month in expenses. So that's really going to bring your bottom line down, and it may not make travel therapy that lucrative for you.
Yep. It all depends on how you handle your expenses. So for us, we minimize the expenses at our tax home as much as we can. Instead of having an apartment, we rent rooms and houses, and that way we have very minimal expenses for our tax home. We have our expenses at our travel assignment that we would have either way. And then so basically we're just taking that salary figure that I quoted, and then you can subtract out that expense for maintaining the tax home, and that's kind of how much ahead we come out traveling. It might be like, I don't know, $40,000 or $50,000 a year ahead of a permanent job based on those numbers.
Right. The other thing you want to take into consideration when people talk about their salary numbers or that sort of thing, they're talking about working continuously throughout the year. Maybe they don't work the whole 52 weeks, but maybe their benefits, such as their PTO, account for their 1 to 2 weeks vacation time. So their pay is based on their 52 weeks a year. Now, as a travel therapist, if you are really maintaining your tax home and going back home the way that you're supposed to, you realistically cannot work 52 weeks a year unless you take a local contract at home. And then for that few weeks or months, you wouldn't receive the full tax-free stipends, but that's kind of a exception to the rule. So in general, you're probably not going to work a full 52 weeks a year, and you do not receive paid time off. So any time off, you need to account for that in your total take-home pay for the year. So, you say you make $1,600 a week, but you're only working 45 weeks a year or something.
Yeah.
So you need to take that into account when you're considering how much you're going to make a year.
Yeah, I would say realistically, most travelers will end up taking 4 to 5 weeks off a year. And some people choose to take off more than that to travel, like we've taken the last 6 months off to travel. So if you want to take more time off than that, then great, but you have to consider that in your pay.
Right.
So working half the year, we made about what we would at a permanent job working the full year, which is great for us. But if you're doing this strictly for pay, then you're going to want to work more than that to try to make as much as you can.
Yeah, so for some people that might be awesome. I mean, you could work, 3/4 of the year or less and make the exact same amount that you'd make at a full-time job, and then get the perks of being able to have time off and have fun and have different experiences and just break even, and that would be awesome. But if you are like a workhorse and work really hard and work continuously throughout the year like we did for the first 2.5 to 3 years, we worked mostly in our home state of Virginia and the neighboring state, North Carolina. We took one job in Massachusetts for 6 months, but we worked around the clock, back-to-back contracts, ended on a Friday, started on a Monday, so that we could save a lot of money and be able to take more time off later.
And one of the main reasons we chose our home state and the state nearby is because we could take trips back home. So we could go back and visit our tax home without having to take as much time off, which was, we might have been working in an area that we can't make as much money, but we don't have to take as much time off because we can go home for holidays and birthdays and weekends. And
the cost of living was a lot lower because we were living in a camper, and we were living where campgrounds in Virginia and North Carolina are typically like $300 to $400 a month, versus the campground that we stayed at in Massachusetts was like $900 a month.
Yeah.
So
makes a big difference.
I see that we've got some comments and questions coming in, so we'll go ahead and recap and go over some of those. If y'all have any more questions based on what we've talked about so far, please go ahead and comment below and ask us.
Anything we're forgetting, because I'm sure there's stuff that we've talked about this so many times that I'm sure there's stuff we're like skipping over.
So Ryan is joining us. He's a third-year PT student looking at doing travel PT. This is a great time to be learning more about travel, so thank you for joining us, Ryan. Cameron also says he is a future traveler. Thanks for joining, Cameron. Benny says, graduating in May, wonderful. Interested in travel, thank you for joining us. And Alexis is graduating in December, also looking into travel PT. Awesome. We got another Ryan here who's also a third-year student looking at travel PT after graduation.
A lot of third years, that's awesome.
Wonderful, I'm glad you guys are looking into it now. Okay, so Lauren wants to know, what do you recommend keeping as evidence for taxes?
So I would keep a lease both at your home location. If you have an apartment, obviously if you own a house, it's not as vital. You have a mortgage that you're paying or taxes that you're paying. But if you're in an apartment or a room in a house, keep a lease. Also keep evidence of how you paid. So either a receipt or like a canceled check or something like that would be good to show that you paid the lease amount. What else?
Some people recommend that you keep receipts for times that you returned home. We haven't done a great job of doing that, but just to show evidence that you went home for a week here or a week there,
or a weekend,
or
like when you're in town, just keep any receipt that you have for gas or whatever.
Yeah,
that would be a good idea
to show that you were in town. We kind of have a folder where we keep like our lease for our tax home. We keep all of our receipts for like campgrounds, or a lease for where we stayed if we rented short term. Cancel checks means like when you write a check to somebody, you go into your bank account and there's an image that the bank takes a picture of the front and the back of the check, so you can print those off from your bank account, or you can go into your local branch and they can print them off for you, so you have evidence that that was paid instead of just like paying in cash. Or if you do pay in cash, you could probably buy one of those receipt books with carbon copies and do written receipts.
Those are the main things.
Yeah,
lease and checks.
Alicia wants to know more about health insurance, so we'll probably do another video just about benefits.
I can link to an article. I wrote a really in-depth article probably 3 or 4 months ago about health insurance. Overall, our experience has been pretty good, though. The health insurance is most companies offer pretty good health insurance. Between contracts, you can use Cobra insurance, which I talk more about in that article. Or you can get marketplace insurance between contracts. If you stay with the same company, then you can usually stay on their health insurance for 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depending on which company it is. So health insurance, between contracts, it hasn't really been a big issue for us. Yeah,
so Alicia, we can link to some articles, and we'll also do a future video just on benefits. I see Judy is tuning in. Kaylee Cole, hi.
50 Mile Myth.
Nice,
Okay.
nice. Yeah, so Kaylee brings up a good point. Kaylee is another travel therapist that's been traveling for the same amount of time we did. And she also has a website where she helps travelers. So Kaylee wants us to talk about the 50-mile myth. Okay, so talking about tax home and receiving tax-free stipends. A lot of companies will use this 50-mile rule where they'll say your travel job needs to be at least 50 miles away from your tax home for it to be considered travel. So the 50-mile rule is not a real IRS rule. They don't really have anything in writing that says how far away from your tax home your travel contract needs to be. Basically what it says is that it needs to be beyond a reasonable commutable distance.
Which can be different for different areas. So,
Right.
you know, if you're in a city, 15 miles might not be reasonable. Whereas if you're in a rural area, we know people in our area that drive 75 miles to work. You know, it depends on where you're at. So the 50-mile rule is not a real rule. It's a rule that was made by some companies, and they enforce it because more than likely, if you're more than 50 miles away, then you are traveling outside of your home, and you're not going to be staying and commuting. And that's basically what they're trying to avoid, because as much as you can get in trouble for not having the duplicate expenses in a tax home, so can your travel company. So if you got audited and you were commuting 55 miles to your assignment and back, and you didn't have duplicate expenses, and you shouldn't have been getting those tax-free stipends, then you would have to pay taxes on the stipends, and the company would also have to pay taxes on the stipends that you should have gotten. So it's kind of their way of ensuring or trying to ensure that doesn't happen as often. But it's not a real rule. It's just it's like an insurance policy for them.
Unfortunately, some companies will hold you to it, and so they might find you a job that's 49 miles from your house, and you might say, that's really far. That's going to take me, based on where I live, that's going to take over an hour. So I'm going to get an apartment there, and I'm going to pay expenses there, and I'm going to pay expenses at home. But they might still be really strict and say, no, sorry, it's too close. Like, we can't pay you.
That's their rule.
So just keep that in mind, but also don't ever allow it to let you cheat the system. Like if they say, oh, it's 51 miles away, I don't care if you live at home and want to drive an hour and 15 minutes there, just as long as it's 50 miles, you're fine. We'll give you the tax-free stipends. That's going to get you in trouble, and you should not do that.
Yep.
So thanks for bringing that up, Kaylee. Let's see. We got Tavo here is asking us, wants to know about travel PT. Wants to know about traveling with his wife who is not a therapist.
So the main consideration there is, what does your wife do? Is it something that would be easy to either find temporary employment somewhere or something to do remotely? Or is it like, is she a stay-at-home type situation with like stay-at-home mom or homeschooling, or, you know, that you have to consider basically, is it going to be easier for her or for the spouse to find work wherever you're at? If it's not a big deal, so if they don't work already, or if they can do stuff remotely, then yeah, sure. It's not bad at all. There's a lot of people that do that. And there's even people that we know that the other spouse will be a student that's doing like distance learning, and that's perfect. You stay at home and study.
Yeah. Margaret wants to know about having a pet with travel therapy. That's definitely doable. A lot of people have pets.
A lot of people have pets.
Amron wants to know more about call-in rates versus overtime versus regular pay. So call-in rates, I don't think is as important for therapists.
It's usually nursing.
Yeah, that's more of a nursing thing. So I don't think you'll ever have to worry about that if you're a therapist. Overtime rates, so that's a big thing that we've talked about a lot and have some articles on. Okay, so a lot of, so say you take a regular job and you have overtime, and it's typically time and a half of your hourly pay. Now we know as travel therapists that your hourly pay is lower because it's only half of your true pay. You're getting paid $20-some an hour, and then you're getting paid these stipends.
Yeah, but you can't. So here's a situation you run into as a traveler. That is not considered pay. That is considered reimbursement. So when you're talking about stipends, you can't consider that part of your pay. So the stipends that we get is a reimbursement for our expenses. The pay that we get is the taxable pay that she's talking about, $20 an hour, $25 an hour, whatever that is.
So, in the eyes of the law, it's like they can really only maybe pay you time and a half on your hourly pay. But we know that that's not a true representation of what we've been paid the whole rest of the week. We've worked 40 hours making, this amount.
It might be $60 an hour once you consider the stipends.
Right. And so to us, it's like, it's not even worth it if you're only going to pay us time and a half on $20. You're going to only pay us $30 for these overtime hours. We don't even necessarily want to work overtime anyway. So that is a discussion that you need to have with your recruiter and with your company. And are talking to several different companies about it. They all do it a little bit different. Some of them have more flexibility in their contracts to be able to say, okay, we're going to instead do just change and put wording in your contract to say, okay, your hourly rate is just going to be this amount, $45 or $50 or $60. There are some that could also say, all right, instead of saying time and a half, we're going to do 3 times your hourly rate.
Yeah.
But what they can't do is they can't pay you more stipends.
Yeah.
They can't call it stipends. They can't pay you more stipends than they were already allowed to give you for the week. So you have to get creative and talk to your recruiter about how are they going to word it in your contract to make that overtime pay worthwhile for you. Some of them, for example, some of the larger companies that kind of have, from a legal standpoint, they have their contracts set a certain way, and they can't go all the way up in their legal system to up ahead to the higher ups to change that wording. So maybe they might just make an agreement with you that if you work overtime, they will pay you a bonus
At the end of your contract.
at the end of your contract. So we've had that happen before. So whatever it is, if you for some reason think that overtime might be a possibility on one of your contracts, or you just want to have it in there as an insurance policy for you, so to say, that's something you'd want to talk about with your recruiter up front before signing your contract.
But we would say you probably want at least double your taxable hourly rate, but ideally maybe 3 times your taxable hourly rate. If you're making $20 an hour, you don't want to be working overtime for $30 an hour. You want to probably be working for $40 at a minimum, but hopefully somewhere around $50 to $60 an hour would be good.
Yeah, and a lot of times you'll bring up this conversation with your recruiter, and they'll say, oh, it's not going to matter anyway. They're not going to want to pay you overtime. No, they don't ever pay travelers overtime. Well, that's not true.
Yeah,
We've worked
definitely not
plenty of rural contracts where they haven't had anybody else there. And for example, like if it was inpatient, acute care or skilled nursing, say it was a really rural area and they didn't have any PRN to cover, if there were evals and stuff that came in on the weekend and we were the only PTs they had, they would let us work overtime because they needed those evals seen.
Yeah, I've worked as much as 65 hours in a week as a traveler, and in 2 years worked $400 of overtime. So if your recruiter tries to say, oh, no, you're not going to have overtime anyway, still just have that some kind of agreement in your contract that covers you on that, because I lost a lot of money when I first started out. 200 hours of that overtime was just paid at time and a half of my hourly rate, which was not very much. But as a new grad, I was happy with it. But I know now that I could have gotten a lot more. So
Yeah.
just have that in your contract.
Let's see. Looks like Rose had some advice for Tavo as far as traveling with her husband. Ryan is being silly. Ryan Kirtley. Let's see. Okay, so Andrew wants to know, are you familiar with any places that would allow he and his fiance to work together but in different settings in the same area?
So all of our contracts, when we're looking for jobs, we're not looking always for 2 in the same place. So we obviously want to be close to each other. We normally want to be within about 45 minutes between whatever facilities we work at. But it's pretty rare for us to actually be in the same facility or working for the same company. So a lot of times she'll find a contract through, say, a facility over here, and I find a contract through a facility over here, and then we live in the middle, and then we commute different directions. So yes, you can definitely find jobs for different settings, for OT-PT, for SLP-PT, for nursing PT, or whatever your significant other does. You can find those contracts, but it's unlikely that you're going to find them in the same facility. So what you're going to have to do is work with a few different recruiters so that you have a lot of job options, and look for 2 different facilities near each other, and then try to find somewhere to live, where it makes sense for you guys to commute.
Yeah, we have worked in the same facility before, but sounds like y'all do peds and then outpatient ortho, so it'd probably be more of kind of just same different hospital, different clinic in the same city, same area. But it's definitely doable. We know a ton of people that travel like ourselves as a pair, and especially in bigger cities, you'll be able to find some jobs together. Okay, this is a good question. So Shawnee wants to know, should you always make more on an extension?
Short answer is yes, you should. How much more you should make is up for debate. Mm-hmm. We generally recommend somewhere between an extra $1 per hour to an extra $3 per hour in some cases. And in most of our extensions, we've gotten somewhere around $2 an hour extra. The reason that you would make more in an extension is because the company doesn't have to pay for the upfront cost of a new contract. So they don't have to pay. They don't have to pay for your travel there and back. So most contracts you'll have included in your contract, say $200 to get to the place and then $200 to get back home. So they don't have to pay that amount if you're not leaving that contract. So that extra $400 is your money to go into this new contract. Another thing would be background checks, drug tests, what else? PPD tests, physicals. All those things usually have to be done before starting a new contract. So the company, licensing. So the company doesn't have to pay for all those things. So that should go back into your pay package. So how much more you can get depends on how much of that stuff was paid for you up front and came out of the pay package to start with. But in general, somewhere between $1 and $3. If we make an extra $1.50 an hour, we're pretty happy with that. If we can get $2 an hour, that's awesome. But
so it also depends on how they put it back into the contract. Some recruiters will be able to put it back into your contract in the form of an hourly increase. Some of them will put it back into you with just a bonus, a one-time bonus, the same way it was given to you in the beginning. So say they paid you $150 upfront for traveling costs. Well, maybe when you do your extension, they can give you another $150 bonus, if that's how they did it before. Say they paid, $100 for your credentialing and your, medical stuff and that sort of thing. Maybe they can give you a $100 bonus to account for that money. But if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, you would have to ask your recruiter how that money was packaged before. So if all the money came out of your pay package, meaning the facility gave your company $60 an hour, and out of that $60 an hour, they took their overhead, and then they also made your pay, your credentialing, your licensing, your whatever money came from that pot of money, that pay package should come back to you. Otherwise, they're just getting more overhead. However, there are certain companies that have special departments for licensing or for credentialing, and basically what they do is they take the money off the top in the form of overhead for every single person on every single contract. So that means, say for example, we took 5 jobs in Virginia back to back to back, and we didn't need 5 licenses because we were already licensed in Virginia. They already took that money off the top of all of our contracts and put it into a department for licensing that helps with everybody's licenses. So maybe somebody like me for contracts 2, 3, 4, and 5 didn't need licensing costs. Well, they would take that money and put it towards licensing for someone else who not only needed a license, but maybe needed a more expensive license like California. So if that's the case, then they might tell you, no, that came from our licensing department. We don't have that to give back to you because that didn't come out of your original pay package.
But no matter what, you should get something at least from the upfront cost that you would have incurred.
Right. So it's kind of tricky. It's not as straightforward as it seems. So sometimes you'll feel like, oh, my recruiter's just being shady. They say that we should get more money on an extension. Why aren't we getting more money on an extension? So you need to ask these tough questions and understand the way things work so that you know whether they're being truthful or whether you're getting screwed over.
And that's why we give a range. You definitely want something, but it might be $1 an hour. It might be more than that. It just depends.
Right. Okay, so we got a couple more questions coming through. We're going to wrap up soon, but if anybody has any more specific questions about pay, let's go ahead and answer those tonight.
What's up, Brandon?
We will,
Good to see you.
We will do future videos about other topics, so if it's kind of outside of this realm of pay, we'll answer it later.
John Sally, man, how you doing?
Okay, so we got a few people hopping on here. Alexis wants to know, do you notice a difference in hourly wage between settings, such as acute, peds, outpatient? Yes, it's not necessarily the hourly, just sort of the take home in general. Like I said, the way that it works is the facility will put a contract up, they'll put a job posting up and they'll say, okay, we're going to pay this amount per hour to the company. So maybe certain settings might pay more, but it's just all going to depend on how it's broken down. I think we see the most money in usually like outpatient.
Home health is always the highest paying. Second is usually probably outpatient. Third would be probably inpatient and acute care, and then fourth is usually skilled nursing.
Yeah, skilled nursing usually pays a little bit lower.
Schools, I've seen sometimes schools can pay really well, or sometimes they can pay not really well at all. So, and there's not usually that many school jobs, but yeah, normally home health, outpatient are the highest, skilled nursing is the lowest.
So to answer your question about whether the hourly is going to be higher or the stipend is going to be higher, like I said, the facility usually just says we are offering this job at this bill rate, which is like $60 to $70 an hour, and then your travel company builds you a pay package off of that $70 an hour. So they take out whatever overhead they need, and then they divide it out into, they'll just play with the numbers. They'll say, okay, we're going to give you this in hourly, we're going to give you this in stipend, and the stipend is based on the location, the geographical location.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the setting.
Yeah.
So you'll get higher stipends in a higher cost of living area like LA versus lower stipends in somewhere like rural Virginia.
And you can see how they calculate there's a website called gsa.gov, and you can type in different areas in the country, and it'll show you what the stipend, like the highest highest amount that you can get in stipends per each city. So, but what you'll find there is that on the West Coast, high cost of living areas, New York City, Chicago, big cities, you're going to have higher stipends available to you versus rural areas where we normally work.
Yep. We got one of our recruiter friends, Elizabeth Lindsay, hopping on and saying hello. Let's see. Amron, better luck next time.
Time and a half. Everyone makes
pretty
mistakes
standard.
in the beginning. Yeah.
And then Kaylee says she's gotten $55 an hour in overtime, which is really good.
That's
You've
awesome.
advocated for yourself. That's wonderful. And the thing is, guys, you live and you learn. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been doing this for 3.5 years, and we're still learning stuff. And we're starting to, like, I'm starting to ask questions I never would have asked of my recruiter. In the beginning, I was just so excited. I was like, yes, you have a job for me. Give me a job, whatever. I'll sign this contract. And now that we're starting to learn more, I'm starting to ask these tough behind-the-scenes questions so I can understand better where my money's coming from and what they can and can't do. And then also, one of the big things that people want to know about is, do new grads make less? So something I just recently talked to several different recruiters about and started to understand is, sometimes yes. Sometimes you might say, oh, the recruiter's just screwing me over and they're taking advantage of me because I'm a new grad. But sometimes the facilities will come back. They'll post like a rate range. They'll say, okay, we're going to offer this job between $60 and $65 an hour. But then if the only applicant they get is a new grad and they interview the new grad and they find out, well, this new grad is going to need a lot of training, they might come back and say, we're not going to do 60 to 65, we're going to do 60. So it might be a little bit lower than if you didn't need a lot of training.
Yeah. Theoretically, you wouldn't make less, but it just depends. There's a lot of moving parts there. What the facility's willing to pay. Sometimes recruiters know that a new grad might have a higher chance of getting canceled. So say they're coming right out of school, they don't know how well they're going to do. So if they know that they might invest all these upfront costs and the new grad might not make it, then they might try to keep a higher percentage, which you can't really blame them for, because yeah, if you put all this money in up front and then the person only works for 4 weeks, the company loses money.
Right.
So there are situations where a new grad might make less, but ideally they shouldn't.
I know, and I hate that, and it sounds like, oh, my recruiter's just being shady, but from a business standpoint, you kind of have to understand that, because they do see that a lot of new grads will get put into a job and then get canceled. Ideally, a good recruiter is going to set you up for success. They're not going to put you in a contract that you're likely to have a bad experience in and likely to get canceled. But these are just some things that, in having a lot of in-depth, candid conversations with our recruiters who have been doing this for a long time, those are some things that they've admitted to us that does happen.
Yeah.
So those are some things to take into account, but also realize the longer you stay in the game, the longer you are loyal to your recruiters, you're good to them, you take a few jobs with them, they get to know you, they get to know, okay, you're a good therapist, you're going to work this whole contract, you're not going to put in a 2-week notice. You know, maybe they will find it easier to give you a little lower, or take out a little
Lower
less.
margin.
Yeah, lower margin is what they call it, like their overhead.
Yep.
Because basically they have numbers they're supposed to try to hit. I think generally it's somewhere between like 20 and 25% is the margin or overhead they're supposed to try to take out. And they have a little bit of leeway. They could play with that, but the lower they go on that, the less money they make. And that affects their livelihood as well. So there's a lot of factors.
If you guys are getting value from this, if you could just please like and comment, share this video with other people that might be interested. The more people that can see it, the better.
Yeah. Bethany just signed her first contract. Woohoo! Congratulations. It is hard to know the ins and outs of pay, and you will learn more as you go along, just like us. Andrew wouldn't want to be in the same facility. Yeah, we understand. We've worked together before. It can be a little tough.
Yeah, working together, commuting together, living together can try
Go to the gym together. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Alicia, do you have an accountant that does your taxes? No.
So, working in different states, doing your taxes, it's not as hard as you would think. It took me a little while to figure it out. Hold on. It took me a little while to figure it out, but once I figured it out, it really was not a big deal. I would say maybe the first year I did it, it probably took me an extra hour to 2 hours to learn how to file the different states. And basically the way it works out is you're filing as a resident of your home state, and you're filing as a non-resident of the states that you worked in. So you're still going to owe taxes in the state that you worked in and in your home state, but you'll get a credit for the state that you worked in that you already paid taxes towards your home state tax rate, which sounds complicated, but if you just do a little bit of Googling about like how do you pay taxes if you work in a different state, you can find that stuff pretty easily. We've filed our taxes on our own every year so far, and it hasn't been a big deal.
Yeah.
If you're uncomfortable with that, you don't like taxes, I kind of enjoy reading about tax laws and tax codes and stuff, so it wasn't a big deal for me. But if you don't like that, then yeah, I mean, accountants can definitely do it.
Yeah, so we've done our own. We've used TaxAct. We've had pretty good luck with it. It kind of takes you through all the steps and talks you through it, and it hasn't been that big of a deal, but you know, if it seems too complicated, definitely reach out to an accountant. I know that Travel Tax does consultations.
Yeah.
So you might reach out to them or ask around in your area. Okay, Melanie, hi, you are a third-year student. How many states do you guys recommend getting licensed in? Melanie, we'll probably do a little bit more on licensing in a different one. This one's getting a little long. It's kind of complicated. I'll share an article we actually just wrote about licensing. There's a lot of different strategies. Either you can get licensed in one, or you can get licensed in a couple, but I'll comment below after this and give you some advice on that. Sam also wants to know about licensing. We just put an article up about this the other day. It's tricky. Let's put it that way. Okay. Xander wants to know if we have any recruiters we recommend. Absolutely.
We have, 3.5 years now, we've talked to a ton of recruiters.
Yes.
Probably dozens and dozens of different companies. So we found some that we really get along with, that we really think work well with travelers and are open and honest, so
right.
We can send you recommendations.
Yep, so Xander, we'll message you after this with our specific recommendations. If anybody else who's tuning in wants to know our recruiter recommendations, you can either comment here.
Just comment
or just
recruiter in the comments below.
Just comment below about recruiter recommendations, and we will shoot you a message. If we are not Facebook friends and we send you a message, just be sure to check your message requests. Sometimes we send messages and they get lost in this secret folder in Facebook Messenger that nobody ever sees. So make sure to check your message requests, and we'll send it to you there. All right, we're going to answer these last couple questions, and then we're going to hop off here because we have packing to do. Okay, so Bethany wants to know about hourly versus stipends. Yes, so that's something we talked about in the beginning of the video. Now's a good time to recap that because we're kind of wrapping up. So just to recap, you get an hourly pay that's taxed, and then you get a stipend pay, if you qualify, that's untaxed. Now, they usually, after they tax this number, they take this number plus this number and they blend it together, and they tell you this is a weekly take-home pay or net pay. So the example we gave earlier, I'll just do it real quick one more time. So they might say you're going to make $20 an hour times 40 hours, which would be $800 gross. So a rough tax estimate would be, say, 20%-ish. So say they take 20% taxes out of this. Now you'd have $640. And then they say, okay, your untaxed stipend money is going to be $1,000 a week, just flat. So then you add $1,000, and then you get this number per week take home. They can play around with these numbers, just like you said. Your recruiter says you can lower the hourly and put more in the untaxed. They can do that to a certain extent. based on the GSA regulations. There's a website called gsa.gov that governs the amount of stipends they're allowed to give you for a certain area based on the cost of living in that area.
And in the high cost of living areas, it might make sense to get higher stipends for living since it's so expensive.
Right.
But you do want to be careful with the taxable pay and not go too low.
Right.
For us, we have never gone below 20. There's some travelers we know that will go down to like $15 an hour, but we prefer to stay right in the $20 per hour range.
Right. So there is a tricky balancing act they can do there for you. You're going to come out ahead if they can put more money legally in the untaxed while keeping this tax number still a reasonable amount. It's just they kind of have to play with it. If anybody has a pay package they're not sure about, you're welcome to send us a message and send us that pay package, and we'd be happy to look over it for you. You will learn as you go along kind of what to look for.
Yep.
Okay, a couple more questions before we sign off here. Scott wants to know, are reduced hour fees common among travel company, where the company charges you a fee if you have a sick day?
So it's a little bit sketchy how that works, because so technically if you were on assignment and you're duplicating expenses and you're paying for a travel location, you should get the stipends no matter what, because whether you were sick or not, you're still having to be in that area. So say you only worked 4 days that week, you still were there 5 days, right? Or 7 days the whole week. So a company can't pay you hourly stipends because your cost of housing doesn't change based on how many days you work. So some companies will do this thing where they subtract out a fee to get around that rule. So yeah, there are companies that do that. I don't think it's very common. Most of the companies that we work with don't do anything like that. You'd still get your stipends. Of course, if you miss like an entire week, that might change things. But if you're missing like 1 day in a week, then you should still get your full stipends. Of course, you won't get your hourly pay because you didn't work those hours, but you should still get your stipends.
Yeah, it just depends on the company. They all do it differently. The way they're looking at it is they were paid a bill rate by the facility, 60 or 70 or whatever it is an hour. And then they built your pay package based off that bill rate. And so they're saying, well, if you didn't work, you know, then the facility isn't paying us. They're only paying us for the number of hours you work. So now we don't have as much money to pay you. So they're taking away some of your money, but it is a little tricky, and it kind of varies by company. Okay, last couple questions. Naya needs a recruiter. Naya, you've been doing this a while, girl, but you know you can message us if you want some other resources. Okay, recruiters, we will send them to you all.
Naya, we're going to Fredericksburg, Virginia next. That's our next assignment. We're leaving tomorrow morning to head up there. Whitney starts Tuesday.
We have all this stuff packed over here. We have so much stuff.
Whitney starts Tuesday, and I don't know what I'm gonna be doing. So I'm probably gonna be like a stay-at-home dad with no kids. So
yeah, we don't have
we'll
kids,
see how
but,
that happens.
yeah, so this is the first time that we've ever done this where I have a job and he doesn't. We had a little bit of a tricky time finding contracts this go around. We were being a little bit picky, and we really wanted outpatient, and so finally we found myself a job in Fredericksburg, Virginia, in an outpatient facility, and I start Tuesday, and they might have a job for him, but we're still not sure, so we're just going to go ahead and move up tomorrow, and we'll see what happens, so we'll keep you updated. Okay, guys, so there's a lot of folks looking for recommendations. We will message you all. Buying a house while you're a traveler, oof, that's a whole...
You definitely can do that.
Yeah.
I know travelers that do real estate investing, and they'll buy houses in the assignment locations they go to, where they find good deals on real estate, rent it out. People buy houses back in their tax home state, and then they live in a room of the house and rent out the rest of the house. So you can do that. It's just, it can be difficult. If you have someone back home or wherever you're traveling that can help you with that while you're working, then that would be ideal, but you can definitely buy a house while you're doing it.
I wonder if she's wondering about qualifying.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. One thing that you have to consider is that because of that lower taxable hourly rate we were talking about, you might not get approved for as high of a loan by a lot of conventional mortgage standards. But there are some mortgage lenders that work with travelers and understand that, our taxable pay doesn't account for our full compensation, basically, and they'll try to take those stipends into account somewhat. So you can find lenders that will do that, but it could change things based on how you do that.
Okay, last couple questions. John wants to know, is it possible to find a 2-month assignment? Absolutely. My upcoming assignment is only like 10 or 11 weeks because that's just happened to be what worked out for us. We've seen assignments as short as 1 week, 2 weeks. Most of them are listed for 13 weeks, but you can always ask, and some of them are listed for shorter.
Yep.
Okay, so it looks like some of you guys are saying it was really helpful. Alexis, thank you so much. If you guys did think this was helpful, if you learned something, please like it, share it, comment below, tag a friend that you think might be interested in traveling or wants to learn more about pay. We would love if you guys would share this and spread the word. We are happy to provide some information, just some wisdom from what we've learned in 3.5 years of being travelers. There's a lot that goes into it, but it's super exciting. It's super fun.
Doing these videos has made us learn a lot more. We're having a lot more conversations with recruiters, learning more things about the industry. So it's been really fun. If you guys have anything that you want to hear about, we're doing these videos every week. So anything you want to hear about next week or the week after or whatever, just let us know. We can talk about whatever you guys want to
and
about.
if you guys want to chat in more detail about other topics kind of outside of the scope of this video, feel free to send us a message. Either you can message myself, Whitney Aiken, or Jared Kazaza. You can message us on our business page, Travel Therapy Mentor, or on our Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist page. But we'd love to chat with you guys, and thank you all for tuning in.
Yep, thank you. See you guys.
We'll see you later. Bye.
See you next week.